The next morning came quietly, like a page turning without sound. Outside, the sky was soft and pale, still touched by the coolness of early light. The city had not yet gathered its noise, and the world felt suspended, held gently between night and day. Scarlett arrived at the studio before anyone else. The room looked exactly the same, but something in it felt full, as though the previous day had left a trace behind, warm, steady, alive. She stood in the center of the floor again, but this time she didn't touch the railing, didn't pace, didn't prepare. She simply breathed, letting the quiet settle into her. There was wisdom in stillness, and she wanted to be sure she didn't speak before she listened. Today felt important. Not dramatic. Not critical. But meaningful. The kind of day where something shifts quietly inside a person. Something gentle. But lasting. Amina entered first again. Her expression was calm, but her steps carried a new weight, not heavy, simply present. She held her notebook loosely, but did not open it. She approached Scarlett with a soft acknowledgement. "You're early," she murmured. Scarlett smiled. "So are you." Amina took a slow breath and looked around the room, not searching, just observing. "Yesterday felt like we came home," she said. Scarlett nodded. "Yes. And today, we understand what that means." May and Courtney arrived together. They spoke softly to each other, not in excitement or intensity, but in warmth. Like two people who had learned there is comfort in simply standing near someone without needing to say much. Daniel followed. His steps remained grounded. His eyes calm. His presence steady. Caleb arrived last. But today, he didn't wait outside the door before entering. He walked in without hesitation, without adjusting himself first. No apology. No effort. Just arrival. Scarlett noticed. She didn't comment. She simply recognized it. They all gathered in a loose circle, not arranged, not structured. It happened naturally, like water forming its own shape when poured into a bowl. Scarlett spoke quietly. "Today is not about movement. At least, not at first." She let the words settle. "We have spent weeks building connection, learning to listen to each other, to ourselves, to silence." She looked at each of them with a kind of calm that came from trust, not instruction. "Now we begin learning how to receive meaning." There was no tension in the room. No urgency. No confusion. Just openness. "Sit," Scarlett said gently. They sat on the studio floor, forming a circle close enough to feel together, but far enough to have room to breathe. Scarlett waited, letting the quiet deepen. "You are each carrying something," she said softly. "Not a burden. Not a wound. But a story. One that has followed you long before this room. One that shaped how you stand, how you move, how you speak." Amina's eyes lowered. May exhaled gently. Courtney's hands folded over her knees. Daniel remained very still. Caleb listened without looking away. Scarlett continued. "We are not here to tell those stories with words. They do not need to be spoken aloud. But we will allow them to be felt. And we will allow them to be held. Not privately. Not alone. But together." She did not ask anyone to share. She did not assign a task. She simply allowed space. A long, soft silence followed. Not heavy. Not tense. Just true. The kind of silence where people are not avoiding something. They are acknowledging it. Amina's breath trembled slightly, not from fear, but from finally not resisting. May placed a hand gently on the floor, grounding herself. Courtney closed her eyes, not to withdraw, but to open inward. Daniel let his shoulders soften. Caleb lowered his gaze, not hiding, but settling. Scarlett spoke again. "Whatever you feel right now, let it exist. Don't push. Don't shape. Just allow." There were no tears. No dramatic gestures. No grand emotional displays. Just presence. And in that presence, something quiet and profound began to shift. The room did not feel like a studio anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. A place where nothing needed to be proven. Nothing needed to be fixed. Nothing needed to be earned. Just held. Courtney reached for her flute not as a decision, but as a response. She lifted it to her lips and breathed out a single, warm note. Not music. Just tone. A sound like acknowledgement. Like exhaling something that had been waiting. The others did not move. But something inside them did. A letting go. A softening. A remembering of gentleness. Scarlett closed her eyes. Yes. This was the real beginning. Not the choreography. Not the rehearsal. Not the performance. But the understanding of why it all mattered. They remained there for a long time, sitting, breathing, listening, until the silence felt not like something to be held, but something that now supported them. When they finally rose, there was no instruction needed. They simply began moving. Slow. Natural. Unforced. The room held them. They held each other. Nothing more was needed. The sun outside the studio rose slowly, casting a warm, golden glow that rested upon the tall windows like gentle hands. Morning light did not rush, it arrived. And on this morning, it felt as though the world itself had paused just enough to watch what would unfold inside that quiet room. The group entered the studio one by one, but today, something was different. They did not linger near the walls. They did not hesitate. They did not wait for instruction. They simply moved closer together. Every step felt softer. Every motion more present. There was no sign of the usual invisible tension that had once lived in their shoulders, their gazes, their voices. Something had settled in chapter 43, something subtle, but real. A foundation. A trust. A shared breath. Scarlett noticed immediately. She didn't speak. She let the quiet speak for her. Quiet was powerful now. Quiet no longer reminded them of distance. It reminded them of being understood. The circle reformed. Without a word, they formed a circle again. No one needed to suggest it. The circle was exactly where they needed to be. Amina sat with her palms resting on her knees. Her breathing was even, not held, not forced. Natural. Her eyes held a depth that came from finally letting herself be seen even when she said nothing. May sat beside her, her posture steady, her quiet strength no longer hidden. She no longer tried to make herself smaller, as though taking space was a burden. Today, she was simply present. Fully. Courtney settled with grace, flute beside her instead of clutched tightly. She did not hold it as protection or performance. She held it like a familiar thought. Daniel sat with his back straight, but his gaze softened. For the first time, he wore no shield, not in his voice, not in his posture, not in the silence. And Caleb took his place. He didn't look away. He didn't guard. He didn't prepare a version of himself. He was here. Scarlett lowered herself into the circle last, not in authority, but in harmony. She exhaled slowly. And the circle breathed with her. The lesson that was not spoken, but shared. Scarlett let her voice be quiet, as though speaking too loudly might disturb something delicate and important. Movement, she said, is not something we push. It is something that rises when the heart is ready to speak. The room listened, not to her voice, but to what rested underneath it. We have learned how to trust stillness, she continued. Now we learn how to move again without forcing meaning. Without performing. Without reaching for approval. She looked at each of them gently. Today, we begin the dance, not the choreography. The dance itself. No one moved right away. There was no rush. Meaning takes its time. The first step. Scarlett rose slowly, smoothing her hair back simply, without dramatic gesture. She stepped to the center of the room. She didn't signal anyone to join her. She simply began. Her movement was slow, soft arcs of her hands, the shifting of her weight, the quiet turning of her spine. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing theatrical. Just breath turned into motion. Someone watching from the outside might have thought nothing was happening. But the group felt it. She was not dancing to show something. She was dancing to remember something. The memory of gentleness. The memory of being unguarded. The memory of how the body speaks without words. Her movement continued, loosening the air in the room, softening it, filling it. There was no music yet. No rhythm beyond breath. Courtney lifted her flute, not because she was supposed to, but because something inside her answered. She played one tone. Just one. Long, warm, unbroken. Scarlett's movement responded, not changed, but acknowledged. The circle watched. Not as audience. As witnesses. Slowly, one by one. Amina rose, her steps quiet, deliberate. She did not try to imitate Scarlett. She did not try to express anything specific. She simply let her body sway, as though listening to something only she could hear. May joined her. Not beside her. Not mirroring. Just existing near. Their movements touched the same air, but not the same shape. Daniel stood next. His steps were grounded, solid, sure. Not heavy. His movement didn't overpower. It complemented. Supported. Caleb rose last. And this time, he did not hesitate. His motion was not refined. Not graceful. But it was true. His hand lifted, not as an idea, but because his body felt the need to reach. Scarlett watched, not as leader, not as choreographer, but as part of what was forming. The room began to breathe in motion. Not dance steps. Not counts. Not formation. Just being. Together. What started to unfold? There were no dramatic emotional releases. No tears. No sudden revelations. The transformation was quieter. Amina's shoulders relaxed, the first time in a long time. May's gaze lifted, not downward, but forward. Courtney's music deepened, not louder, just fuller. Daniel's movements softened, not less strong, but more open. Caleb's breath steadied, not shallow, not rushed, steady. Scarlett stepped back, not to separate, but to allow. They didn't need guidance now. They had found the beginning of their shared voice. Not one person leading. Not one person following. A collective tone. Something that belonged to all of them. When the music finally changed, Courtney's flute slowly faded into silence. The room did not stop. Movement continued, self-sustaining, connected, effortless. Then something subtle happened. The sound of footsteps outside the studio. Soft. Slow. Approaching. But no one in the room flinched. No one turned. No one lost the movement. Whatever approached was not a threat. It was simply time. The door did not open. Yet everyone felt it. The world outside this room was beginning to notice what was happening inside it. This was no longer just practice. And not just healing. And not just growth. This was the beginning of what would become the performance. A performance not designed to impress, but designed to be understood. When the movement finally stilled, the group's steps slowed at the same pace, naturally, without cue. Their breathing deepened, sinking without intention. Their bodies returned to stillness in the same moment, as though the movement itself had drawn to a close when it felt finished. No applause. No commentary. No analysis. Just stillness. Comfortable. Shared. Scarlett stepped forward only once the stillness held steady. And she said softly, "Now." Her voice warm, steady, assured. "We begin." No one doubted what she meant. Not rehearsal. Not preparation. not formation. The journey toward the performance had finally, truly started. And they were ready. Not because they had mastered steps, but because they had learned how to move with each other. The morning after their shared movement felt different, like the air itself had learned something. Even the hallway outside the studio seemed quieter, as though sound didn't want to interrupt what was growing there. Scarlett entered first today. Not to lead, but to witness. She stood in the center of the room and simply looked around, taking in the stillness. The studio was not just a place anymore. It had memory now. It held what they had given it, every hesitation, every breath, every step that had grown from something unsure into something steady. She let the quiet rest on her shoulders. This is where they become themselves, she thought. Not dancers. Not performers. People who could stand without hiding. One by one, the others arrived. Amina entered with calm footsteps. There was a lightness to her face now, not joy exactly, but openness. She moved like someone who had finally set something heavy down. May followed. She held her bag in one hand loosely, not clutching it close as she once had. She walked with space in her stride, not shrinking, not folding inward. She looked around the room as though she belonged in it. Because now, she did. Courtney came next, flute in its soft case, her expression thoughtful. She didn't rush inside or wait at the threshold. She simply stepped in, present, ready, unguarded. Daniel arrived quietly, as always. But there was no stiffness today. His presence was solid, but not protective. He no longer looked like he needed to brace himself against the world. Caleb came last. But he did not pause at the doorway. He did not adjust his breath. He did not calculate how to appear composed. He walked in and joined them, without hesitation, without performance, without walls. Scarlett felt a small warmth inside her chest. It was happening. No instructions today. Scarlett did not call them into a circle. They moved into one on their own. They sat. They breathed. They listened. Not to words. To each other. Scarlett smiled, not outwardly, but in the quiet of her mind. Then she spoke. Today is foundation. They looked at her, not with confusion, but understanding. Not the foundation of steps, she continued, but the foundation of how we listen while moving. She rose slowly. Each of you will move, she said. Not to be seen. Not to show anything. Simply to exist in motion. And the others will observe, not to judge, not to compare, but to witness. This was not performance. This was presence. Amina. Amina stood first. Her breath entered slowly and left slowly. Her movement began small, just her hands, tracing soft lines in the air. Then her spine followed, her arms, her shoulders. Every motion had the feeling of unfolding, like a flower opening in slow time. There was no urgency. No push. No attempt to mean something. Her movement was simply honest. And for the first time, she did not look afraid of being seen. May watched with quiet admiration. Courtney watched with stillness. Daniel watched with respect. Caleb watched with a softness no one had seen in him before. Scarlett didn't correct anything. Because there was nothing to correct. May. May stood next. Her movement didn't imitate Amina's, it grew from something entirely her own. Her steps were grounded, steady, like roots finding soil. Her hands did not flutter, they pressed the air gently, as if shaping something unseen and important. Her movement did not try to be delicate. It was strong. But the strength was not force, it was clarity. She did not need to prove it. She simply lived it. And the room felt her truth. Courtney. When Courtney rose, she did not touch her flute. She didn't need to. Her movement was quiet, like the beginning of a melody before the first note. Her gestures drew shapes in the air, soft and fluid. Her presence felt like calm water. The group understood. Music lived in her, even without sound. Daniel. Daniel stood. His movement was simple, minimal. He didn't try to create pattern or beauty. He only breathed. Shifted his weight. Let his shoulders open. Let his chest soften. Let his spine lengthen. And in that simplicity, he allowed himself to exist without defending himself. It was the kind of movement that required courage no one could see, only feel. The others felt it. Scarlett felt it. Caleb. Caleb stood last. The room did not expect anything of him. And for the first time, he did not expect anything of himself. He lifted one hand. Not to reach, but to acknowledge. The air. The space. The moment. Then he stepped. Not smooth. Not perfect. But true. His movements had edges. His pauses were longer. His breathing slipped and returned. But nothing in him tried to hide. And that made his movement real. Scarlett felt something settle in the room, gentle and certain. They were no longer 5 individuals trying to be enough. They were becoming a unit. Not identical. Not merged. Just aligned. The work begins. Scarlett stepped forward now, not to lead, but to guide. From now, she said, every movement you make must come from breath, not effort. She demonstrated. Inhale, arm rises. Exhale, shoulder softens. Movement that grows from breathing cannot be forced. Your dance, she continued, will not come from what you think. It will come from what you feel when you are not trying to feel. They understood. Not intellectually, but inwardly. Today, Scarlett said, we begin learning how to move with each other's breath. She looked around the circle. Not by matching. Not by following. By listening. This would take time. This would take patience. This would take honesty. But they were ready now. Because they trusted the silence. They trusted themselves. They trusted each other. And trust is the only beginning that matters. The studio was quiet again the following morning, yet it carried a different resonance. Light streamed through the tall windows in golden shafts, illuminating dust motes that danced slowly in the warm air. There was no rush. There was no expectation. There was only the present, waiting to be discovered. Scarlett arrived first, as always, moving through the space with deliberate calm. She inhaled slowly, letting her senses expand into every corner of the room. The polished floor reflected the sunlight, but it also reflected something else, the energy of those who had been here before, and of those who would soon enter. The room remembered them, held them, and waited for what would come next. She did not speak. She did not pace. She simply stood, letting her awareness anchor the quiet, letting it prepare a space for what was to come. Amina entered next, her footsteps soft but assured. There was a new fluidity in her motion, a subtle confidence that was hard to define but unmistakable to those who had known her struggle. She stopped for a moment to take in the light, drawing in its warmth, and then moved further into the center of the studio, her gaze calm and serene. May followed, holding herself differently than yesterday. Her posture was relaxed yet strong, not rigid or defensive, a harmony between stillness and movement that suggested she had begun to inhabit her own space more fully. The weight she once carried, the invisible pressure of expectation, was lighter now. It didn't leave her entirely, but it no longer defined her. Courtney entered after her, flute case in hand, not hurrying, not trailing hesitation. She observed the room briefly, noting the way sunlight played on the walls and floors, then moved to her designated corner. There was a quiet resolve in her eyes. Today, she thought, she would listen not just to the sound she could create, but to the sound of presence itself. Daniel stepped in next. His calm intensity had grown deeper, more measured. His movements were considered, almost meditative. He did not scan the room for threats or cues. He simply stood and breathed, preparing to allow his body to respond organically to what he would feel, not what he thought he should do. Finally, Caleb entered. He did not pause at the doorway. He did not adjust himself. He simply walked to the center of the room, carrying a calm presence that did not dominate but offered steadiness. This was new, an openness that had not been present before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the others felt it immediately. The circle forms without words. Today, no one needed to call them together. Their movements toward the center of the room were instinctive. They formed a circle as naturally as a tide forming along the shore, seamless and unforced. No one took the lead. No one hesitated. They simply aligned themselves, aware of each other's space, yet unbound by it. Scarlett observed quietly. She had learned the power of watching, of allowing the room to teach itself through its own energy. The quiet was teaching them more than any instructions could. She knew that, in this space, the smallest shift could ripple across the group, connecting everyone with invisible threads. She finally spoke, her voice gentle and deliberate. Today, we explore the space between breath and motion. Not the motion itself, not the steps, not even the form. The space between. That is where the meaning lives. The words did not feel like instruction. They felt like an invitation. A soft call to listen, not to the sound of words, but to the resonance of presence. Amina's journey. Amina rose first. Her motion was measured and fluid. She began with subtle movements of her hands, letting the air around her respond to the smallest gestures. Each inhalation caused a ripple through her spine, each exhalation released tension she hadn't noticed she was holding. Her eyes closed at times, not to shut out the world, but to focus on the interior landscape of sensation. There was no performance in her movement, only awareness. Her body remembered itself in ways it had forgotten, discovering softness where there had been rigidity, discovering expansion where there had been contraction. The others watched. Not to judge, not to copy, not to analyze, but simply to witness. The air in the studio began to thrum with subtle energy, not audible, but tangible. May's expression. May rose next. Her movement contrasted with Amina's but complemented it naturally. Where Amina's was fluid and flowing, May's was deliberate and grounded. Each step carried weight, but not heaviness. Each gesture was strong, but not rigid. She bent and rose, shifted and twisted, yet remained connected to the floor beneath her. Her feet rooted her, her arms expanded her, and her chest opened as though she were drawing sunlight into her body. The rhythm of her breath and her movement was almost musical, though no sound was made. Scarlett noticed how May's openness invited a subtle shift in the energy around her. The room was beginning to respond to individual expression while remaining cohesive as a whole. Courtney's soundless song. Courtney stepped forward. Her flute remained in its case. Today, she would not play it. Instead, her body became the instrument. Her movements were light and precise, like fingers tracing invisible strings in the air. She moved with the space itself, guiding her gestures as though the room whispered melodies to her alone. Her eyes were half closed, but she did not retreat. She did not shield herself. Instead, she allowed the air to carry her intention outward, creating waves that the others unconsciously absorbed. Even without sound, her expression sang. Daniel's subtle strength. Daniel's movement was minimal but powerful. He shifted with careful deliberation, making small adjustments in posture, releasing tension in long, slow exhales. There was nothing showy about it, nothing theatrical. His presence was the anchor around which the others could experiment safely. He did not lead, and he did not follow. He simply existed in the space, observing, adjusting, breathing, creating a silent rhythm that guided the circle without words. Scarlett could feel the energy settling around him, stabilizing the room, giving permission for vulnerability and expression to coexist. Caleb's honest motion. Caleb rose last. He had been silent until now, observing the others, feeling the room, sensing the unspoken threads connecting them all. When he began to move, it was neither refined nor calculated. He let his body respond naturally to the rhythm of the circle, the inhalation and exhalation, the subtle shifts in the room, the vibrations of presence. His motions were honest. Imperfect, yet grounded. Every gesture was an acknowledgement of connection, not performance.
He didn't try to mirror anyone. He didn't force himself to match anyone. He simply moved, and in doing so, he reminded the others that presence itself was a valid expression. The unseen orchestra. The studio had become an unseen orchestra. Each person contributed to the resonance in their own way. Each breath, each movement, each pause added a layer to the invisible harmony. No one needed to speak. No one needed instruction. No one needed correction. The air itself carried understanding. The room itself became a teacher. Scarlet finally stepped into the circle. She did not initiate movement. She did not lead. She inhaled. She exhaled. She allowed her body to respond naturally to the subtle currents already moving through the group. The others noticed, but they did not copy. They simply adjusted. And slowly, imperceptibly, they began to move as one, aligned, not in form, but in essence. Silence filled with meaning. They slowed. Gradually. Imperceptibly. Until they stood still again. The studio was quiet, yet there was a palpable hum. A hum of understanding. A hum of trust. A hum of shared presence. Scarlet finally spoke, her voice soft and deliberate. This is where we begin. Not with steps. Not with form. Not with expectation. But with presence. With listening. With understanding the space between breath and motion. They nodded. They did not question. They had already understood. The quiet carried more weight than any words could. And in that quiet, the group felt it, something fragile, something strong, something essential. They were no longer separate. They were not a single entity either. They were connected by intention, by trust, by attention. And that connection, the invisible thread weaving them together, was the foundation for everything that would follow. A moment before action. Scarlet allowed them a long pause. She did not instruct them to move again. She did not prompt. She simply allowed them to exist in the stillness, letting the awareness of each other settle deeply into their bodies, into their minds, into their spirits. The room seemed to breathe with them, echoing the quiet rhythm of intention. And in that space, the true work of becoming began, not choreography, not performance, but the quiet cultivation of self, of trust, of connection. No one spoke. No one moved. And yet, the room was alive. Alive with the first glimmers of understanding that would carry them beyond the studio, beyond the rehearsal, into something lasting. Scarlet exhaled. The circle exhaled with her. And for the first time, the studio felt complete, not full of motion, not full of sound, not full of effort, but full of meaning. The next morning, the sunlight arrived gently, spilling through the studio windows, warming the polished floorboards like liquid gold. The room no longer felt empty. Every corner, every surface seemed to hum softly, as if it remembered the breaths and gestures of the day before. A faint aroma of lavender, lingering from Scarlet's small diffuser, settled into the air. It made the space feel safe, inviting, a cocoon where growth could happen quietly and honestly. Scarlet arrived first, as always, but she did not move immediately. She lingered in the doorway, letting her gaze sweep across the studio. The sunlight drew long, thin patterns across the floor, and the dust particles floated like tiny stars in a gentle galaxy. She allowed herself a private smile. There was a calm here she hadn't felt in years, a quiet that wasn't empty but pregnant with possibility. She stepped forward, bare feet landing lightly, feeling the cool wood against her soles. The silence was complete. It was a silence that could hold anything: conflict, laughter, hesitation, revelation. Today, she thought, the silence itself would teach. The arrival. Amina was the first to enter after her. There was a subtle difference in the way she moved this morning. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her spine carried a quiet elegance. Each step was confident yet unhurried. She paused near the windows, letting the sunlight touch her face, and took a slow, deliberate breath. The world outside might have been noisy, chaotic even, but here she belonged to the rhythm of the studio. May arrived next, her movement distinct and grounded.
The weight she had once carried, the invisible heaviness of doubt and self-consciousness, was no longer evident. She walked with space in her stride, her hands loose at her sides, and she stopped to look around the room, letting her gaze linger without tension. Courtney followed, flute case in hand, her eyes thoughtful and calm. She did not rush, and she did not hesitate. Her body moved naturally, as though guided by some unseen current of the studio itself. The subtle strength in her posture reflected inner resolve, a resolve that would now translate into the motion she would bring to the circle. Daniel arrived quietly, his presence steady, measured. His movements were minimal but purposeful. Today, there was no hesitation, no guard. He breathed in alignment with the room's energy, not imposing himself, not retreating, simply existing in resonance with what had begun to take shape here. Caleb entered last. His blue eyes carried a soft intensity, one that did not command but anchored. Today, he felt no need to dominate or protect. He moved with honesty, letting each step fall naturally, letting his body respond to the room, the light, the air, the presence of the others. Forming the circle. The circle formed itself naturally, without instruction. It was not forced, and no one looked to another for guidance. Their presence alone drew them together. The invisible threads that connected them yesterday had grown stronger overnight, and today, they were more tangible, more immediate.